Hello, so I'm going to explain to you cellular degradation. And so this is a Max Live instrument, and so it has a few things going on here. One is this central display, which is showing us a cellular automata. And this just applies certain rules to change the values of the cells based on their neighbors. And so that's one thing going on here. And the other thing is the audio process. So basically I applied this cellular automata, these cell values, to audio parameter values for a polyphonic tone generator system. So let me unpack that a little. If you'll notice, if I change the number of voices, we can see that parts of the grid get blocked off. And when we're at one voice, we just see these two columns. At two voices, we see these four columns. So each voice is giving us two columns. What's up with that? Each column is a chain, an independent tone generator. So in total, we have up to 12 tone generators. But you'll see each voice gives us two. So each voice gives us a stereo pair because each column is hard panned a different direction. So first column's hard pan left, second column's hard panned right, and then left, and then right, and then left, and then right, left to right. So it just keeps alternating left and right channels. So if we have one voice, we have one left to right channel pair of tone generators. So that's what the columns represent. And then the rows, they represent audio parameters. And we can see here that all these parameters correspond with each row. So the top row is feedback. The next row is tuning. The next row is FM, and so on and so on. So columns, once again, are the generators, and rows are the parameters. So maybe you can make out what's going on now with these cell values. These are the values for each parameter. So if it's all the way yellow-orange color, that means the value of that parameter is as high as it can be. And then you can see it will fade down back to 0. So that's fading the value. So that's basically how you work with this device. You can draw, or you can draw here and save that picture or record your drawings, and then apply certain rules. I'll get into that. And then those will change the values and create like a modulation of these values. And okay, so I'll just start going through the device left to right now that we got the general idea covered. So let me clear this. So up here, so here's our first little section. Here at the top, we can choose to run or pause the cellular automata. This button's pretty obvious. This changes the rate of the cellular automaton, so how the frame rate. So if I go really fast in hertz, it's going fast, and slow, it's going slow. Okay, and we can have that also synced to the clock time. So you can have changes synced to the clock. Okay, then here we kind of get this now. These are the voices, but as I said, each voice is actually stereo pair, so it's more like ×2. You can have up to 12. Okay, then down here are the rules. And this I encourage you to look up online for more info. And I've done something a bit different than usual with this, but than is typically done. But basically this tells you so it will go through each cell, and based on its neighbor, so say this cell I'm clicking here, it will say, hey, how many neighbors does it have? What do they sum up to? And based on that number, it will either decrease or increase the value of that cell. And these rules basically set that. So we have born, and that says, hey, if there's either 2 or 3 neighbors, then let's increment the value, or let's start making value. So that applies if there's an empty cell. And survive will be like, right now it's saying, hey, if there's 3 to 4 neighbors, this is a range, then we'll keep incrementing the value. And if there's not, if there's 1 neighbor or 6 neighbors, then we'll start decreasing the value. And basically by changing these things, you can change the dynamics of the system. And I encourage you again to read online for a better explanation. But the difference I'm doing here is increasing and decreasing values versus turning them on and off, like in a... Okay. Anyway, and then this value here, intensity, that is the value that it increases or decreases by, based on its neighbors. So if I turn that up, we'll see it's like getting a lot quicker in change. And then if I turn it really low, we're seeing like a more gradual change. Yeah, and that'll also change the dynamics. Alright, so that's this first section. That's kind of how this whole thing's running. The second section is like about the grid and drawing. So this top part, grid, is like the values on the grid. So if we like at any moment, hey, I like these values on here, I want to actually start with these values every time I load, then you'll save it. And now every time you press re-init, it'll go to that state. Or if you have re-trigger on, every time you start the transport, it'll go to that state. So just started the transport and it went to that state. So you basically can save the state that is recalled, and it's recalled whenever you press re-init, or if re-triggers on, whenever you start the transport. And of course, this also is for every time you load the preset or load your live set. And then we can clear the grid here. Draw XY. So if we want to draw, we can use our mouse, but if we want to map it to an XY controller, you have this Etch-a-Sketch kind of drawing here. Now these buttons record and loop anything that you draw, whether with this or with your mouse. So if I clear it and press record, now I'll just draw some stuff, and now it will loop what I just did. And then you can press record again and add more, and keep adding more and more and more. And yeah, and just keep in mind the CPU will start getting higher and higher the more loops you add, because of the object I'm using, dict, to store the values. For some reason its CPU gets higher to write more values the more you do. But don't worry, the play will always maintain the same CPU, so you can record a lot and it'll still play back just as fine. It's just recording will get the higher CPU. And then value, this is the value that it draws when we press it. So if I lowered it, now it's this dimmer value. If I hired it, now it's this brighter value. And then you can turn it to 0 to erase. Cool. Alright, so this whole grid section all figured out. Then over here, as mentioned, these are the audio parameters for every tone generator. So each tone generator has its own set of parameters, and of course the grid will apply them differently. Will modulate them differently because it's in this space. So yeah, okay, I guess I will run through these so you can understand the processing going on in the tone generator better. So let me explain the chain that's going on here. Basically, we have a sample playback happening, and it's actually a very low frequency of playback. So even though this device uses a sample, the highest rate of playback it can get is a quarter of the normal rate, so 2 octaves down. And at the lowest, it's very low. It's as slow as a low frequency oscillator. Okay, I decided I will just write this for you so it makes a bit more sense. So first we have the sample playback, and that's like very low frequency, so it's almost like an LFO. And that goes into a state variable filter, in which I get a low pass and a high pass output from that you can morph between. And then that goes to a delay line, right? And then from the delay line, it goes to like a kind of normalization of the signal that was inspired by Skirwell, and that's what adds like this really clicky, poppy kind of brutal sound. That's the degradation. And then after the normalized, it goes to feedbacks. So it feedbacks to the filter, and it's where it does, and then so it goes to feedback, and it also, let me do it like this. It goes to feedback, and it also goes to sum and output to cross modulation. So yeah, after that it becomes a cross modulation source too. So that's kind of the chain. It's quite simple, but also quite weird. So then, and the cross modulation, that goes to AM, FM, and lookup, and the lookup scan. I should write it because that's how I wrote it there. So yeah, so this is what's going on somewhat. And okay, so let's see. That here, so we got the feedback. This is the feedback from the delay to the filter. The tuning, this is the playback frequency of the sample, which at most goes to a quarter, like 2 octaves down, very slow playback. The FM amount, the scan amount, so this is the amount of sample lookup modulation, so that'll add even a lot more clicky sounds. Then the amplitude. Now the amplitude won't always change the volume, but it will change the volume of the output of the sample. But then you have the feedback, so that's its whole own. So the amp will change the dynamics, but not necessarily always the volume, depending on the parameters. And then you have your AM amount from the cross modulation. You have your filter cutoff, filter Q. This is the morph between the low pass and high pass filter. Delay time. Now these deal with the normalization, because I use the envelope to normalize it. So this is the decay of the envelope, the clip, and the filter. These will really affect this kind of clicky, glitchy, or degraded sound too, especially the envelope clip. Lowering that, the lower this value gets, the more it's gonna add a lot of clicks and things like this, and become more brutal. So, okay, and then what are these? So these number boxes, each one of them corresponds to a different parameter value. The first ones are the offset. So at 0%, this is just like starting at the lowest value, and then we can offset it up to the highest value. So this is the offset, and this is the range of the modulation. So if I had it at 20%, and this at 0, that means that we're modulating between 0 and 20%. But if I turn this up to 50, now this means that we're modulating between 50 and 70%. So this is the range of modulation added onto the offset. Okay, so then we go here. We have a sample drop. You don't have to drop a sample. The sound will change a lot whether you have a sample or not. It'll make a big difference. So just depends what you want. But you don't necessarily hear the original sample. It just kind of informs the tone generators. And so different samples have different dynamics, but it won't necessarily sound like it. Then we can randomize the modulation values here. We can do a real-time pitch shifting in the frequency domain with this. It's a very cheap effect, but it could be nice depending on what you want. That just frequency shifts the whole output. And then this width, so like I said, the columns go between hard panned left and right, so it's like left, right, etc. But this will lower the width of the panning until it's mono. So it's kind of just like using a utility object and changing the width. And then you can pan that afterwards, and then you have the gain. So yeah, that kind of sums the whole thing up. Yeah, to get the dynamics of it, you can either just save a grid and have that recalled, and then it will go from there, or you can record your drawings and have that continuously change, or you can do a combination of both. Well, I hope you enjoy. Let me know if you have more questions or issues.